Hi, these will be really quick notes on transformations of exponential and logarithmic functions. We're going to build off of what we already know about transformations. So if you are having trouble with this section, because I'm moving a little too fast, you might want to go back to a 2.1 video all the way back in chapter 2, or maybe like a 4.6 transformations of polynomials, and do a deeper dive. Let's see. So let's take a look. Just hopefully you remember these transformations, and they're going to be exactly the same. And the ones to look out for are still your horizontal translations, left and right. So take a look. The negative turns to a positive 3 right. The positive goes -2 left, right? So left and right are still the opposite of what you see. And then horizontal stretches and shrinks are still reciprocals. The only thing that's different about this section or this chapter is that instead of having like x plus 5 parentheses to the second power, which was a parabola, we now have different bases. So this right here, 4 to the x, is our parent function. This x minus 3 doesn't have parentheses shown, but we know that these two are grouped together. So that's the same as the parentheses we used to see when we had, say, like x minus 3 squared. Right, so that's inside. So this is still inside left and right. If it's a bigger number, that x is by itself now, and that number at the end is up and down that we're being added to. Reflections are still the same. Over x-axis is negative in front. Over the y-axis only flips your x's side to side. So let's take a look. The only thing you need to look at now is that there's an extra 6 that makes things confusing, but these are just the parent functions, and then you only need to compare what has changed. So we're looking at this first graph, and this second graph, g of x, has an additional plus 6 at the end, which is 6 units up. This one, the x in the x direction, we're moving, right? So there's a -4 that's extra, switch the signs as usual, and it's going to the right. This one I wanted to make clear that when we do reflections and stretches and shrinks, it doesn't matter which one we do first, because multiplying by a negative and then multiplying by 1/3 is the same as multiplying by 1/3 and then a negative. Okay, just make sure that you do your multiplication first and then your shifts. When we do this, where I sort of write it out one by one, so I take the 3 units up, and then I write in the reflection in the y-axis, which is right there, that negative. If it was a reflection in the x-axis, that would change things, and this positive 3 would flip over the x-axis and become a -3. Okay. In this case, when we reflect over the y-axis, there's a negative. The translation left and right, I hope you remember that it has to do with only the x, and it ignores the negative. So the negative is an extra multiplication, so that when we write it in and this -3 left turns to positive 3, right, which is looks like the opposite sign because 3 left is negative. Well, when you distribute the negative, it comes back and becomes a negative, and then a vertical stretch just is multiplied in front. Okay, so just be careful there. Logs are exactly the same. They're the inverse function. The only difference is that now there's this invisible base, which we haven't talked about yet, but this is an invisible base 10. So it's exactly the same, but you ignore the bases. They always have to be the same, and you're only looking at the difference. Ooh, this one has a vertical shrink. I almost missed it. Of 1/2 as well. Okay. Everything here I think is going to be pretty straightforward. You're just identifying the shifts or translations and stretches and shrinks. This one is the one I talked about. A reflection in the x-axis is negative f of x, which means the whole function is multiplied by a negative. So that log x gets a negative in front, and the positive 3 is multiplied by a negative. Please make sure you catch that one. This last one is exactly the same as the front.